Okay, once again, good morning. Almost afternoon here on Wednesday, May 6th. We're going to be going over our agenda here, a few announcements, and then we are taking a look at Darwin, the ideas that shaped his thinking. This is what we're going to go over here during this office hour. And then also, there's a natural selection virtual lab. So we are going to be going into natural selection. But before we do that, let's go over a few announcements. Did you hear the information about the final exams being optional? Except for math, where it is required because it is the math placement. In biology and the other subjects, final exams are optional, but you have to let teachers know if you're going to take it. So by May 14th and 15th, you have to inform teachers of your desire to take the exam or just go with the grade that you would earn by the end of the semester, which is May 22nd. And I will have built into the attendance question whether you would like to take that. That's kind of the unofficial notification that you are going to take the final exam in your classes. But the official one is on a form from the school, and it's called the waiver form. So if you are going to take the exam or waive the exam, you are going to be sending in a form, which is your official notification, because you have to agree to accept the score you get on the final exam. For example, let's say you are a borderline grade, maybe 89 to 91%, somewhere in that, cusp of the next grade. If you do well, great, your grade's going to go up. If you don't, your grade could go down. And so you do not get to keep the better of the two. Like, hey, I got worse on it than I thought, so I don't want it to count. If you're going to take it, it counts. So that's why there's a waiver form. The final exams are the week of May 26th to the 29th. I don't know which classes, if it is certain blocks or subjects. Haven't seen the official schedule yet for the exam week, but that is when you would take the exam. It is 50 questions long, multiple choice, true and false, and it's got a test bank to it. So your questions may be slightly different than others. So it's a shortened version of the exam. Normally it would be 100, 120 questions. So it's designed to be completed within 30 minutes office hours period for our class. It is all inclusive from everything we've covered here in the second semester. And there will be a semester exam study guide for those who are going to take the exam. So let me know if you have any questions at this point throughout this session. I will check chat questions and then see if you have any questions at the end as well. So I'm going to tell you about the extra credit reminder about May 18th. The extra credit is due on that date. You've had a couple of months to work on it. That will really help your grade, boost it up a couple of 2, 3 percentage points. So you'll want to get that in. That really will do a nice job of raising your grade in the right direction. The STEM project, still planning on moving ahead with that. In the next class, you'll get information with it. It's a watered down version of the STEM project. Get it? It's a STEM project on water, and we're going to kind of minimize it so that we can complete it in a short amount of time, dealing with the topic of water with science and technology. So I've got a few ideas, and I'll have it finalized by Friday. It will be posted. We'll go over in the next class. So let's move on with the ideas that shaped Darwin's thinking. I'm going to get that ready so you guys can do that too. Okay. Hopefully you've got this. You can check the recording of this video. If you miss a slide, I could go back to a slide or two as well at the end for those who are live on the meeting. And there are fill in the blank notes for you guys to complete. So we have now spent a couple classes on Charles Darwin and the groundbreaking theory of evolution. The title of the video that you watched was Darwin's Dangerous Idea because it really changed the way that people thought about the world and their place in the world. See that last line right there? Charles Darwin started a new way of thinking about the world, and he was not all by himself. We're going to go over several scientists that he was looking at and seeing their geological, their natural or naturalist type work. And it really influenced Darwin. What set Darwin apart from these others is Darwin was able to see the world. Everyone really was quite limited in their travel back in that day. But Darwin went aboard the HMS, which is His Majesty's ship, the Beagle from England, and it was a voyage for the country to find trade routes and to find things that would be valuable for them. They brought along Charles Darwin because he was what is known as a naturalist, someone who could pick out plants and animals and determine if they would be good to bring back. So he was collecting specimens, taking some notes, but he didn't know everything about science. He was a, a smart guy, but mm, kind of street smarts, as you say. He he had a critical thinking mind. He wasn't the sharpest student, as we learned before, but because he was on this 5-year voyage and was able to see every continent and see the similarities of animals and plants globally, our ecosystems, as we learned in the first semester, are really based on how far you are from the equator, the tropics, the subtropics, the temperate, the Arctic regions. And because he traveled across the globe in these areas, he would see similar ecosystems, but similar yet different types of animals and plants. So now globally, they're different, and locally, they were different. And then over time, he started to recognize that things are different. So over time is really kind of what we're dealing with today with geology and the interaction of organisms in their environments. And so two guys in particular, Hutton and Lyell, geologists, changed or proposed the way that people viewed how old the earth is. These guys concluded that the earth is extremely old. Prior to that, people thought the Earth was just a few thousand years old, which in a human lifespan is still a long, long time. Maybe they were going off of the Bible and the references to generations in the Bible, from Jesus to King David and Abraham and all that. So they were a Bible based um, society, and they took things literally in the Bible. And that's really the way that things were for a long time. But these guys concluded that the Earth is not just several thousand years old, but it is much older than that, like millions of years. Don't know if they used the word billion, but now we know that the Earth is very old compared to what they thought before. So we're going to go over these two guys. When we have a quiz on this, you'll be able to use your notes. So you don't have to memorize Hutton and Lyle. But imagine if you did, if you, like in years past, you had to come up with a way of remembering Hutton and Lyle. And my analogy, which will stick with you, is a simple hut on the beach. And if you had a big rainstorm and a flash flood, it would wash that hut away. And if you were lying down inside your hut, you would be washed away too. So you get my play on their last names, Hut and Lyle. You're lying down in a hut, and in geology, you have natural forces. Call it a hurricane, a fire, a flash flood, an earthquake. These are forces that are shaping the earth. And Darwin, on his voyage, was in an extremely large earthquake that moved the earth about 9 to 10 feet. And they noticed a rock that punched out over the ocean that used to be under the water, and now organisms were clinging to it. And then Darwin actually seeing it and then realizing from Hutton and Lyle that the earth has a process that, because just like mountains and valleys and rivers cutting into the land, and there's forces that we have to live by, right? The natural forces, the physical forces in physics here on our planet. And if you see small changes like he did, and Hutton and Lyle as well, they could recognize in their time and in their lifetime that the earth is being molded and shaped and changed and folded. And they recognized that some rocks were formed from molten lava, some from sediment being deposited, like sedimentary rock, some being pressed by weights called igneous rock. And so these guys are putting forth the knowledge of geology that is saying, hey, there's a lot of changes going on now. If the changes that we see now with our large mountains and large valleys, and how about the Grand Canyon? These things were cut by these forces that take a long time. So there's no way that the earth could be young. Have you recognized any of these rock formations as you're traveling on the freeway? If they had to cut through the rock, you can see lines where the different layers of rock were laid down as sedimentary rock. If you've been to the Grand Canyon, it's an awesome reminder of how a river starting at the surface has cut down a mile down into the ground to create this canyon. And this had to have taken millions of years. So this was kind of new information for people. The video called Darwin's Dangerous Idea is a perfect title for that video because everyone was set in their ways about their place in the world and how God created the earth, and everything is pretty static. So they were a young earth type of society. I had a student a number of years back hand me some information about the young earth movement. It's still alive today. There are many people that believe that the earth is not old. And if you say, well, what about all these fossils that we can dig up out of the ground? Their response, I don't know if it's their complete argument, but they say God created the fossils and he put them in the ground. So, however they theorize this, they are still in the belief that it's a young Earth. So, for one of your extra credit options, if you would like to research the new Earth way of thinking and contrast that with what we can see as evidence of slow geological changes over time, showing that the Earth is millions of years old compared to thousands of years. So Hutton proposed that the forces that can push rocks upward and twist them and tilt them, they can form mountain ranges. Now, in my lifetime, I've been through an earthquake that I didn't visibly see 10 feet of movement, but I could see cracks where I am and an inch here and there. But they also, on the San Andreas Fault, have seen 5 to 6 feet movement on like the Northridge earthquake. And now look at our Saddleback Mountains. They're 4,000 feet high. And these are high mountains that were formed by earthquakes adding up over time. It's mind boggling to think of how much time must have passed to accumulate all that change to push it up. Well, we know about plate tectonics. There is a Pacific Ocean plate that is being subducted, pushed underneath the North American plate, some of which comes back up as molten lava in volcanic activity, but a lot of it is just crumbling from the two plates, and it has no place to go but up in forming the mountain ranges. So Hutton introduced a concept of deep time, the idea that our planet's history stretches back farther than we can imagine, farther back than the human race has been on our planet, you know? And so it's really hard to imagine it. It's hard to explain um, this to people that believe that the earth is young. And then Lyle had this thinking of uniformitarianism. That means that the process that we see in action today was the same type of action in the past, and it will be the same action in the future. So it shapes our planet. And just like volcanoes now, we had volcanoes in the past, and so on. So it's just a principle that we have certain laws of nature at work, and it's not like they've changed. So, in essence, these guys, Hutton and Lyle, argued that the Earth was much, much older than everyone believed at the time. And so, Darwin is like, you know what? If the Earth is old and is acted on by forces, couldn't there also be something acting on plants and animals that are here? I've been up to the top of Saddleback Mountains, and I have seen shells of sea creatures up 4,000 feet above sea level. Darwin went up to the top of the mountain, thousands of feet above sea level, and saw the same thing. How did they get up there? It's because the tops of the mountains used to be underneath the water. And so he's starting to put things together based on his 5-year journey, based on Hutton and Lyle. So he's asking himself, if Earth can change over time, couldn't life change too? All life is here on the planet, and it's either you survive all of the calamities that can happen with fires and earthquakes and hurricanes and everything, competition for space, competition for food, for shelter, trying not to be a meal for somebody else, trying to have enough offspring so that the genes could be passed on. So Darwin's thinking about all these things. He didn't set out to do this. It's just because he was on this 5-year mission, and his job was to look at plants and animals, and he did that with a critical thinking eye. Now there's two more that we're going to talk about. Lamrack. Uh, Lamrack proposed that plants and animals change over time, and Darwin wasn't the first one to come up with explanation for how things operate here on our planet. But Lamreck suggested a strange idea. Let's do a play on his name. Lam Lamrack, Lam lame. This is a lame idea. Let's just start off by saying that, and it will help you realize that we're just explaining a way of thinking that was the wrong way at the time. In a nutshell, if you acquire a trait in your lifetime, let's say that you are a perfect speller and you've worked hard at it, and now your offspring are going to be perfect spellers. If you win an Olympic 100-meter dash, fastest person on the planet, just because you did it, are your offspring going to do this? If you're an elephant and you're reaching for the tallest leaves and you've stretched your neck, so to speak, your offspring are going to be born with longer necks. Um, it was an idea, but it's a lame idea. We're going to get to two reasons why. So let's move quickly through this. And they noticed in the fossil evidence that life changed. They can see that Darwin collected some specimens. Notice like, wow, this big, huge skull at the beginning of the video. It's not alive anymore. Why isn't it? What made him pass away? Um, what makes some survive and some not survive? They're trying to think of ways. So here's a Frenchman in the turn of the 1800s proposed that if you selectively use, or if you don't use something, you're going to lose that, or you're going to gain that. These are called acquired traits. If you acquire a trait, then whatever you acquire in your lifetime, you will pass on to your offspring. And that's how species change. Um, it's an idea. So it starts with the assumption that we have an inborn urge to become more complex and perfect, and that there's a struggle to change and to live more successfully in an environment. That's not necessarily the case. Um, Couple of examples. How about a bird that is, you've seen the shorebirds along our beaches? Let's say that they just start walking into deeper and deeper water, and they're like trying to stretch their legs, and wow, they're able to do it, and now they have longer legs, and then they have offspring that have long legs. Kind of weird, huh? How about a bird that stops the urge or the need to fly, and so his wings become too weak for them to become airborne? The wings become smaller. Then their offspring are going to have smaller wings. If you think back to what we've learned in the past few months, you know that mutations are random and they're at the DNA level. You have a misspelling of A, T, C, and G. And sometimes, if it's just one letter off, it can drastically change the protein. And the protein is then going to make for a smaller wing or body structure. So that's what they're saying. And so these are acquired characteristics. A black neck stilt could evolve longer and longer legs over generations because now they're going to deeper and deeper water. Okay, moving on. We know that this hypothesis is incorrect. Organisms don't have this inborn drive to become more perfect. We are perfect in the sense for you have everything you need in your genetics to be successful. Sometimes, because of the randomness of change, it enables some to be a little more successful in dry conditions, wet conditions, windy, uh, you know, temperature, whatever it is, speed. But that doesn't mean that they're imperfect. Variation is great for a species because it allows for some to survive in case things do change. In addition, whatever you acquire in your lifetime is not necessarily passed on to your offspring. It's not your acquired trait. It's the genetics and the genetic code. So, evaluating Lamrecht's hypothesis, it was interesting that Lamrecht was one of the first guys to say that species are not fixed, that they do change over time. So that was a win right there. And it was based on natural processes, so that was good too. So there's also something with your environment and body structures. So that was good as well. But his whole idea about you acquire a trait and pass it on. That's where it went awry. Now, quickly, you might recall from the video Darwin's Dangerous Idea that Darwin and his brother were talking about Malthus. They grab a book off the shelf and they go, I think he was even a relative, and they go, "Yeah, remember that about Malthus to struggle to survive? There's not enough nutrients in the environment, not enough food. You know, if the human population grew unchecked, there's just too much of a struggle. There's too much competition. You're gonna have the haves and the have-nots." Remember when they were going to dinner in their carriage and they were being stoned? Uh, they were being yelled at by people in the streets who were starving, and these guys are going to go to a fancy dinner. So there's a struggle for limited resources with humans, and Darwin's like, couldn't that be the same thing that is driving force in nature? And this ends up being his um, one of the most important things here in his thinking about nature selects those who are going to survive. It's called natural selection. The strongest, the fastest, whatever the condition is ripe for. So think about what's happening even now. We have a growing population that is maybe reaching the peak that the world can handle for food for everybody. We certainly have enough food if it was distributed properly around the world, but as the population gets higher and higher, there might not be enough food. There might not be enough space for everyone. So Darwin applied this to organisms as well as humans. So take a look at an oak tree. They can produce millions of seeds. There are some fish and other creatures that can produce millions of eggs. There's no way that the planet will support that many. Most offspring die before they reach maturity, and only a few survive. That's the struggle for life on this planet. And so Darwin was convinced that species evolve because the strongest survive and they pass on their genes. You can see it all around nature. Even the last few weeks, I've been watching some ducks during mating season pair up, and then there are some that are left unpaired, and they will fight the pairs to try to knock out the male and kind of earn the right to pass on his genes. And so, if you watch for this, you can see it all the time. Even seedlings trying to grow up underneath a tall oak tree are going to struggle for sunlight, and sometimes the needles from pine trees are going to hurt the soil underneath to stop other things from growing on it. So they can't get up and move, but they have a way of competing with one another. The last topic we're going to talk about is artificial selection. This means that nature doesn't select, but man selects. So we're going to go over just two quick examples of how you have selective breeding with dogs. Recall in the video of Darwin's Dangerous Idea, they were looking at a couple different species. Nope, that's not right. They're looking at a couple of variations of the one species of dog, some small, like the little runt that Emma was holding, and then the giant, like working sporting dog that the other guy walked up with. If you want to have a working dog, you're going to have to select the two parents that are good, strong specimens, and then you are going to have big, strong offspring. If you want a small lap dog, you're going to mate it with another small dog. So that's artificial selection. Breeders know this. They've been doing it for hundreds of years. Farmers select the trees that they want, the type of orange trees, the type of watermelons, the cows that produce the most milk, the chickens that are going to grow the fastest. And now we can even modify their genetics to change things as well. But selective breeding means that you pick the parents and then you are going to have the offspring. So Darwin even played around with this with his pigeons. So he raised and bred plants and these fancy pigeon varieties. So that rounds out the ideas that shaped Darwin's thinking. So, do you guys have any questions? I haven't seen any pop up lately. So, let me um, just check real quick. I can